Luke Bronin is the former mayor of Hartford who served 2 terms. Mayor Luke Bronin, thank you for joining us. Mayor, we've spoken quite a bit together as reporter and mayor. You served as mayor of Hartford from 2016 to 2024. Why leave municipal government for Congress, and why is now the right time?
Well, I left the mayor's office 2.5 years ago. I served as mayor for 8 years through some of the most challenging times in the city's history, from starting and inheriting a city that was on the edge of bankruptcy and then leading through the pandemic. I loved that job, but I felt like 8 years was the right amount of time to do it and then pass the torch. This is a race I would not have expected to run a couple of years ago, but I think the world changed when Donald Trump got elected for a second time. A president who is a con man and a criminal, and I think a would-be fascist, and he won. And I then saw the Democratic Party respond with what felt to me like not nearly enough energy or clarity or strength. And I think so much is at stake right now that we have to build a Democratic Party that is strong enough to defeat Donald Trump, to defeat the MAGA movement, and to make the bigger changes we need if we have a chance of fixing this mess.
Help me understand the calculus in taking the next step. It sounds like Congress might be the way forward because, as you're saying, you're looking to lead the Democratic Party in a fight against Donald Trump. That's better than, say, trying to run for governor or stay in municipal office. You'd rather just do it from that position, you're saying.
Well, I think the threat to our democracy, the threat to working families and the middle class is coming from Washington. It's coming from the Trump administration. And it's coming from the fact that we have not built a Democratic Party that's strong enough to defeat the MAGA movement. And I think the Democratic Party would be so much stronger if more of our leaders recognize that part of leadership is knowing when it's time to pass the torch. So I think the stakes are so high right now. And I respect everybody who has served in Congress for decades. But I do think this is a moment when we need that renewal. We need some new perspectives, and we really need some new energy.
Something I think about at the hyper-local level is how mayors deal with crime. We talked a lot about crime, as it were, happening in the city or steps you would take to try to combat it. So we talk about leveraging local groups like the Compass Peace Builders to patrol neighborhoods, or efforts to keep illegal guns off of the streets that come in. How does that kind of policy now going to translate to the federal level? So how do you sort of leverage what you do locally and those connections you made, and then now deal with lawmakers in Washington, D.C.?
Look, first of all, the issue of gun violence is not an abstract issue to me. I've sat in a lot of living rooms with parents who have lost kids to gun violence. I've been to a lot of funerals where kids are grieving their friends. We did a lot in this city, building partnerships, helping to strengthen community violence intervention groups, building things like hospital-based intervention, and building, both law enforcement and community violence prevention, a system that has helped to bring down gun violence dramatically. And we saw what it can look like when the federal government is actually a partner in that efforts. And now we're seeing what it looks like when the federal government is scaling everything back. I mean, Donald Trump is dismantling the ATF. They are making it easier for gun dealers to put illegal weapons into dangerous hands. They are making it harder to trace weapons. They've pulled back the funding for community violence intervention. So down in Washington, I think this is a great example of why it would be helpful to have people who can bring a mayor's perspective, having been on the ground doing that work and recognizing how much it can matter if you have a federal government that's a real partner, and who can also be out there as a vocal advocate for building a movement to do those things.
You think that municipalities like Jacksonville, Florida, or Little Rock, Arkansas, where there might be crime numbers and people don't look at them that way because it's not like a liberal city, do you think you can sort of try to effectuate change in cities like that and introduce groups like the Compass Peace Builders, those kind of groups, those neighborhood kind of groups?
I mean, first of all, I think some of the cities you mentioned, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but I think some of those cities have some of the highest levels of gun violence. Look, I spent a lot of time with mayors from across the country, and cities across the country deal with the same challenges. I think there's absolutely room to build common ground. And I think the work of trying to strengthen violence prevention is not a partisan issue. But we do have to build a Democratic Party that is strong enough to do it, because the Republican Party has no interest in doing it, from everything I can see.
Another thing about your time as mayor is the state bailout in 2017. The state stepped in to help with Hartford's $500 million of debt. Nearly 10 years on, how do you look back at that experience, and really how you manage the situation, because it did happen before you pretty much got there. A lot of it.
Yeah, I think, Frank, as you know and remember, when I became mayor, the city was on the verge of bankruptcy, and with a real possibility of having to file bankruptcy, which would have decimated city services. It would have slashed pensions for retirees. It would have crushed municipal employees. And we did a lot of hard things. We made some really tough decisions. Our community came together to make those hard decisions. Our unions stepped up in a big way, and I'm deeply grateful to them. We asked our corporations to step up and put real money and real skin in the game. And, of course, we built that different kind of partnership with the state. I think what we did differently in my time as mayor, when I first came in, was we were honest about the size of the problems. We didn't pretend that this was something we could fix by just continuing to do the same thing the city had always done. I think the city had kicked the can and hidden those problems for a long time, and my team and I refused to do that. And I think that's what we need in this moment. There's so much broken right now. We have corruption that is out of control. We have an economy that is only working for the wealthiest few. You have costs going through the roof. And again, we have a Democratic Party that has not been able to win. We lost not just the White House, but the White House, the Senate, and the House. And so if we're not willing to be honest about how broken things are, then we don't have a chance of fixing them. And so it's that same spirit of saying, let's acknowledge the reality of what's broken, and then let's get serious about fixing it.
As one congressman, though, what can you do to help people in Connecticut that are dealing with affordability issues? We've known that the government has had to, the state government has had to come up with essentially a slush fund to try to make up for some of the cuts that have happened. So how can you help on an issue like healthcare?
Look, what I think every single Democratic member of Congress needs to recognize is that the mission right now is to build a movement outside the walls of the Capitol. This isn't just about what's happening in the subcommittee rooms. It's, are we out there, building a movement for an agenda that's going to make our economy work again? And to me, there's two big things. First, when we take control of the House again, we need to do everything possible with every bit of leverage we have to stop the damage Trump is doing, because the reckless war in Iran is driving up costs. His, cruel cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act are driving up the cost of health insurance. The tariffs across the board have driven up costs. So the first thing we have to do is stop this president from doing stupid and reckless things that make things worse. And then I think we need to be loud and clear and courageous about an agenda that is focused on big things like healthcare, housing, electricity. Those are all issues where the federal government, Congress, could do a huge amount to change the game if we were willing to do it. And I think the Democratic Party has been too cautious about tackling those issues in a serious way.
A lot of the things we're hearing in debates before this show airs, there would have been two debates in a week where you all were squaring off the four candidates in this race. And a lot of them are talking about money that you're getting into your campaign. They're saying it's coming from billionaires and executives. What do you see about your fundraising efforts and criticism from your challengers?
Look, the first thing I think it's important for everybody to understand is on day one of this campaign, I said that I would not take a single dollar of corporate PAC money in this race or in any future race for Congress, because there's just a huge problem with the amount of corporate PAC money that floods our system, and it's why it becomes so easy for people who've been in office for decades to just stay there, and it makes them complacent and cautious, because if you've been there forever as an incumbent and you take corporate PAC money, you open your campaign, you hang an open sign on the door, and the corporate PAC money just comes rolling in, and it's so easy and comfortable that people don't make the big changes.
So when people are looking at your financial advantage here, help us understand the strategy that you all have as a campaign. How are you trying to fundraise? As best as you can tell us, what's the strategy? Who are you taking money from?
Sure. So, I have thousands and thousands of people who have supported this campaign, given, everything from $1 or $3 up to the maximum contribution for the primary of $3,500. And I'm grateful for that support. And anybody who supports me knows what they're getting, which is somebody who is going to fight for universal health care, for making the wealthiest Americans and corporations pay their fair share and actually pay what they owe by closing the crazy loopholes, abolishing ICE, investing in housing, and yes, fighting to protect Social Security. I think anybody who supports me knows that throughout my career, I have been focused on fighting for fairness. In the Obama administration, I was part of the team that helped to create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to protect Americans against financial abuse. By the way, in the face of a flood of corporate PAC money and banking lobbyists who were trying to defeat that. In Afghanistan, I served on the anti-corruption task force. And then for 8 years, people saw me work 24/7 fighting to lift up a city that had been left behind and I think in a lot of ways screwed over for a long time. So I think people know who I am. They know who and what I fight for. And I've been clear in this race, again, about what I'll fight for. And it's for an economy that actually works for working families in the middle class.
I want to wrap up this conversation here. If elected, what committee assignments would you seek and why? Just help us understand your first couple of years. Well, obviously, it's every 2 years you have an election, so that's always going to be fun if you win. But just help us understand maybe the first year on the ground in D.C.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say, because I think this is really important, is that the mission right now is as much outside the walls of the Capitol as inside. If we don't win back so many people who have given up on our politics, engage young voters who've decided our politics doesn't work, get back so many people who gave up on the Democratic Party because they didn't see us fighting for working families, then whatever happens in the Capitol isn't going to matter as much. So a big part of it's outside the walls of the Capitol. But like I told you, in the Obama administration, I was part of the team that helped to create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Donald Trump has now dismantled that. I'd love to be part of rebuilding that. You know, it's work that could be done at the House Financial Services Committee. It's also a committee where you could do a lot of work on housing opportunity and housing finance. You know, as mayor, I put a huge focus on getting housing built of all kinds, thousands of units. And I've also seen that the federal government is not as good a partner as it should be in getting that housing built. So that's another area where I'd love to dig in on. That's a same committee where you could do some of that work.
You've been listening to Luke Bronin, former Hartford mayor and Democratic candidate, the endorsed candidate for Connecticut's 1st Congressional District. Luke, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you, Frankie. Thanks.